Hi, I'm Edward Funk, and this is podcast 81. And this is kind of an interesting one. It's about Loretta Young's father dying. Um, no one in his family has seen him for 44 years. And so, what's it like to show up at the funeral? You'll soon find out. I get into that. On the last podcast, we talked about Loretta getting an honorary degree at Providence College in Providence. And, I was kind of her escort. I went with her. And, you know, as always, Loretta was so professional. I mean, she had a fabulous speech written. She delivered it fabulously. She was everyone the people there wanted her to be that day. So now back to today's podcast. On June 8th, 1948, just months after Loretta's had won her Oscar, the Los Angeles Examiner proclaimed on page 1, "Father, Loretta Young didn't know, succumbs." The story reported that John V. Earl, age 58, had been living in an Alhambra rooming house. Just a little detour here. Why is he calling himself Young? Well, he did when he was married to Loretta's mother, and now those girls got the name Young. It's because Young was his mother's second husband, and he was actually born while she was married to her first husband, whose last name was Earl. But to make it a little sexier, the John's father was really kind of a secret lover. His last name was Mendel. So if they really had the name biologically that should have been theirs, it would have been Mendel. But anyway, they ended up calling themselves Young. I hope that wasn't too complicated. So anyway, a description of what he had been doing in his adult life. I mean, he's been gone for 44 years. He had married a second time to a woman named Rhoda, who had died 14 years earlier. His job history included managing an Alhambra music store, clerking in a stationery store in the same town, opening a hot dog stand in Redondo Beach, which failed, selling drafting instruments, and working in a Los Angeles City College bookstore. Now, the Examiner also scooped a copy of a letter that Loretta's grandmother, Mrs. Laura Young, had supposedly written to her famous granddaughter. "Dear Loretta, I am obliged to tell you that a person who called himself John Earl died in the county hospital of a stroke or a heart attack yesterday and is to be buried in Woodlawn Cemetery, Santa Monica at 1:30 on Thursday. Notify your mother and others who should know. Everything has been taken care of as a monthly check I received from the Good Samaritan." That means Loretta, the grandmother, a monthly check, and had for many, many years, has not been used for, in other words, she had savings from those, and that could cover the funeral costs. So again, dear, you pay. All my love, Grandma. Now, the newspapers reported that Loretta was unable to attend the funeral because of a picture commitment. Loretta didn't remember if she was working or if she wasn't, but she commented, "Even if I hadn't, I don't think I would have gone. I felt nothing for my father, and I thought, I'm not to go and make a public spectacle. All the cameramen would be there, and it would be a lie. I didn't even know him. But I guess I felt that he must have been kind of a bum to leave Mama with all the kids. And I think he shifted his financial responsibilities onto my shoulders because it wasn't long after he left that I first worked and brought my salary home to Mama." Now, John Earl had reemerged in 1936 through a surrogate. I mean, no one saw him, but a priest had approached Gladys and the girls to pay for a new prosthesis. And I don't expect you to remember all this stuff. He'd been wearing a prosthesis since he was a kid. And Gladys said, well, sure, we'll pay for it. And then she said, he's your father, probably needs money. We need to send him a check every month. And Loretta said, well, I'm not going to send him money. And what I'll do is I'll send more money to grandma than she can take care of. That was another podcast, but kind of explains the financials here. So Sally, who had been her father's favorite, and she was crazy about him, she said, I talked it over with Mama. Now, this is back in 1936. And the girls, and they all said, oh, no. You don't want to do that. What are you going to say to him? And what was I going to say? Are you the man who went away when I was 6.5 and didn't ever give us any Christmas presents? And for several years, I was just sure he'd show up. But he never did. For all I knew, he didn't even know if we had enough food to eat or if any of us were sick. What was I going to say to this man? Now, as the writer of the book, Behind the Door, the real story of Loretta Young, Lady and their brother John, to get their impressions of when they had gone to their father's funeral. And each one was different. So here we go. Loretta and Gladys had made their decision not to attend the funeral, but Sally wasn't going to pass the opportunity to see her dear Papa one last time. She recalled, I was 4.5 months pregnant, and I didn't want to go by myself. That's why Polly Ann went with me. I said to Polly Ann, let's send some flowers just in case. All we knew was that the service would be at a certain hour, and so Polly Ann and I got there early because I didn't want to waddle in, being pregnant. And the only flowers that were there, besides our spray of red roses, were homegrown and scrounged down in mason jars with a fern thrown in here and there. And there were three of those arrangements. Polly and I were saying the rosary, and Jack came in. You remember he's the brother. As he'd been walking in, a man who approached him, not even realizing that Jack was his son, said, would you stay all the way through and help us carry the casket? There were only a couple men there, and they were old, and Jack agreed. Jack and I were absolutely hypnotized by looking at Papa in the box, because we've always wondered what he really looked like. And I was so glad because he looked so much nicer than my Aunt Grace said he did. He was really a nice looking man. His hair was white by that time, but there were all kinds of things that you could recognize. The ears were set on the head, just like mine. And the forehead, I always thought I had my mother's forehead, but it was his. Then I couldn't help but cry, because he had the cheapest, worst suit on, tan with red stripes. I just cried. I love men's clothes. And I love men's clothes always. I knew it was him, but I wasn't positive. I really wanted to lift up the bottom part of the casket to see that his right leg was missing. Now, Polly Ann remembered the Christian Science ceremony at the funeral as being very brief. Some man got up and talked for a minute, and that was it. She remembered looking at her dad in the casket. He looked exactly like he did the last time I saw him. He didn't look much older. I was more moved watching my brother. Jack had never seen him to remember him. He stood there so long, just looking at his father. Now, Papa was a good-looking man, and Jack resembled him quite a bit. I thought to myself, oh, there's something very strong between a father and a son. Jack didn't say a word, but you could tell. The other thing that impressed me was that this woman came in. As it turned out, she was father's, quote, special friend, end quote. A newspaper account reported that a Miss Laura Lund of Formosa Beach had claimed his body. Jack remembered looking at his dad. I cried a little bit. I really hadn't met him during his life. I didn't think I looked like him at the time, but later I saw pictures of him when he was 24, and that was me all over. At a distance, you would mistake him for me. Same build, same appearance of the head, same ears hanging out a bit. Like Sally, Jack had been curious about his father. He reflected. My mother didn't want me to go to try to get in touch with him, and I never pursued it. Still, I came close to meeting my father, though I didn't know it at the time. I was going to Loyola Law School, and nearby was Dietz Engineering Supply Company. I was very interested in drafting, so I'd look at the drawing instruments as I went by, and one time I saw this man inside looking at me with kind of a scared expression. At my father's funeral, I found out that that's where he had worked. I walked by many times during those 3 years to law school. He must have known who I was. Now, Sally found it bizarre that the three of them were strangers at their own father's funeral. She recalled Dad's woman friend and her friends must have discussed it on the way to the cemetery because when we arrived, he came to us and said, "Come sit where the family sits." Sally also recalled it was sad. Someone tried to give us each a rose from the spray, and Pollyann wouldn't take one. She just wouldn't accept it. I took mine, and Jack took his. Sally and Pollyann visited with their father's woman friend at the gravesite, Sally recalled. She was a school teacher, very refined looking. She told us that she'd wanted to college just before my father went into the county hospital, but that Grandma had said no, do not involve them in this. They've done enough. After the funeral, we went over to Loretta's. She and Mom were huddled together, and Mom wanted to know just exactly what it was like. We told her about the woman and what she looked like, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad I." We went to see Grandmother Young's and our Aunt Grace the next day. Grace said to Pollyanna and me, "You girls certainly are the essence of your mother. She always liked Mom, and you're nothing like your father." Now, this is Sally talking. That wounded me a little bit. Grace always told us that Papa used to think that, again, Sally saying that he would go to a Loretta Young movie and he would think that that was Sally. And no one could convince him that any Loretta Young movie that he'd see, that, that he wasn't watching Sally and he was sure it wasn't Gretchen or Loretta, as she went by both those names. Anyway, he couldn't be convinced otherwise. A couple of days later, Dad's woman friend called my house and she started it on me. She asked for money for taking care of Dad for all the time she had known him. I was pregnant and overly sensitive anyway, and my husband, Norman, got on the phone and he really told her in no uncertain terms to go to hell. Gladys summed up John Earl Young in a quote from the Los Angeles Examiner at the time of his death. He was not a mean man, but he was a weak man. And she added, he was handsome, much too handsome for his own good. So that's it.